about what the last like 4 weeks or something. What's the last month been like? What's happened in your life? Update me.
It has been very intense. Where do I start? I think it was really this step of understanding, like not only in my mind, but really understanding that I have the power to change things. Like I knew it and I had done it for a long time, but I needed like a deeper understanding of that.
Yeah.
And I think I was just scared, to trust. And it was easier for me to trust life than to trust myself, but you need both because in the end it's both the same. Yeah. So it was well, I don't think if it wasn't working is not exactly the right term, but I couldn't feel really comfortable because obviously if I can't trust myself fully, then things are not going to show up in my life the way I want them. So it was really this thing of deeply integrating that it is safe for me to feel safe. That's one of, it's probably the sentence that I read last year that struck me the most, because when I read it, I was like, oh, I hadn't realized that I felt insecure when I relaxed. And when I read it, it really made sense. And then I could understand where it came from. And this last month has been kind of accelerated, intense learning of this, like really to know that when I relax, it's safe. And I don't have to jump back all the time to thinking about the thing that is not working the way I wanted, because this creates more of that. So it was really, really about this and about fully taking responsibility. And I think that's a key element. You already talked about it, but I think it really needs to be repeated and until we understand, because sometimes it sounds like, oh, I'm responsible, and it comes with a kind of stressful or unpleasant feeling. But in fact, when you say, okay, it's mine and I can do something about it, it actually feels much more relaxing.
Yeah, definitely. It's I want to respond to the safe, to feel safe thing, but and being able to relax. But first I want to respond to the idea of being responsible. It's interesting when you're told that you're responsible for your experience and you're not feeling in control of your experience, then often the reaction is, why are you blaming me? It's not my fault. Like things are not going my way and I had nothing to do with it, and like, don't blame the victim. Except that it's interesting that we would even react that way. I mean, ultimately it's really that I would say it's because our internal guidance is reacting, because it's not the one responsible, and we've been basically blaming ourselves. That's why we feel blamed. Like, obviously, how could we feel blamed by another person? Because we've been blaming ourselves. So, if we're putting on ourselves that things are not going well and telling ourselves, that we're bad or we're wrong, or or we did something that we shouldn't have done, or whatever else. When we're telling ourselves that, then we're already going to be sensitive to being told by other people that we did something wrong. That's why we have the experience that we have. And yet, ultimately, the only path to making changes is if we're actually responsible for our experience. Because if we're not, then what hope is there? We should all just give up. If we're not responsible for our experience, we can't change it. So it doesn't matter. Like, then it's like, well, just adjust. But obviously that doesn't actually work. Although that's a lot of people's approach, is just adjust, just like deal with what's happening. And that's what we tell ourselves that causes further problems, because we tell ourselves we should just deal with what we're doing when we're not listening to ourselves and not doing what we want to be doing, and we're not feeling good, and we say, well, deal with it. basically to ourselves, like, I'm doing this anyway, like, even though it doesn't feel good, because I have to, because it's the practical thing to do, or it's the responsible thing to do, or it's the thing I have to do for the sake of someone else, or it's the thing I have to do for the sake of making an income, or it's the thing I have to do for whatever reason. So but the thing is, we're still the ones making those choices, and we can change that. We can change our prioritization of things. We can decide, even if we end up doing some of the same things, that we do it for different reasons, that we would feel better to have done it than not to have done it. And then we no longer feel like it's being imposed on us. We're actually working with ourselves. And sometimes it would lead to completely different actions. But anyway, as far as that responsible element, it's interesting to, that it's not inherently blame just because we're responsible, and without responsibility there's no possibility of change. And when it's interesting when, especially when someone comes to a coach and doesn't want to be responsible for their experience, then obviously what are they looking for from the coach? Basically to change their experience for them. Because if they're not responsible for their own experience, they can't do anything about it. And so why would they ever go to anyone for help to help them change their experience if they can't change their experience? Then they're basically saying, you change my experience for me, which is very much obviously like, the mentality of a lot of the world. Like, I'll take a pill, I'll go to someone, I'll go to a doctor, I'll eat terribly and then I'll go to a doctor and they'll solve my problems, all the health problems that arise from not taking care of myself and not exercising and not eating and whatever else. But ultimately, no one can actually change our experience but us, which goes back to the responsibility for our experience. And when we are actually taking responsibility for our experience and going in a direction that feels good for us, then we get to the other part of what you were saying, the relaxation, that's genuine relaxation, because we can't really rest and give ourselves permission to and feel safe to if we're headed the wrong direction and hoping that something else is going to somehow take responsibility for our experience for us and save us from the fact that we're going the wrong direction. It's pretty hard to relax. It's like if you're going the wrong direction on the highway and you're getting further from your destination and not closer, and you have a time frame within which you have to get to where you're going, it's pretty hard to relax and feel safe, to just be safe and relax and be comfortable, because you're going the wrong direction. So you're on alert. How do I turn around? What do I do? Like I can't keep going. I'm going 70 miles an hour the wrong direction. I can't do this. So because I'm just getting further from my goal. So obviously, if we're headed a direction we don't want to be going, then we've got to actually turn around and go a direction we do want to be going, and then we can feel safe to be safe. So it's interesting, the things that you brought up there, because they're interrelated. It's first that we take responsibility for our experience to enough of a degree that we actually are headed a direction we want to be going, and then we can relax and feel safe. Because to the degree that we're feeling like the outside world is responsible for our experience, we can't actually feel safe. Like it's not really possible, because anything could happen and we don't have control over it. If we feel like the outside world is responsible for what we feel, then like some crazy thing could happen any moment and we have no say. So how could we just relax and feel safe when we know that anything could happen and we can't control it? But if we do feel that we are responsible for our experience, then we can control it. We can control how we experience life, and we can control what we're going to be experiencing, and that regardless of what happens, we know what we will feel. And if we can decide that, then we can feel safe, because we can decide we're going to feel safe. And then we can actually let ourselves feel safe. So, and then we can actually relax. And obviously that is a much better way to live than the alternative.
Yes, completely. And I think maybe even before taking responsibility is acquiring the belief that I can do something, and I have the power, even if I don't know how. But then if I'm convinced that I have enough power to do a little something, then I can start taking responsibility. And so it's really this thing of how we perceive ourselves, and the self-concept that we have, that am I someone who can do something? And it can be like a very small thing in the beginning, just to, am I someone who is able to wake up every morning at 7 if that's what is required? Okay, if I believe that I am, then I can take responsibility for this. So it goes really deep, and often we are so blind to those beliefs that we have about ourselves that that's where it's always helpful to have someone who can show us and say, well, I've heard you say this or that. And oftentimes I find it interesting in conversations with clients, in they say, oh yeah, well, I like myself, it's fine. And then I hear them talk, and they have this self-critic vocabulary that they use it all the time, and they're completely unaware of it. And then I say, well, you've just said that, and I repeat it word for word, and they're shocked. They're like, what? I really used that word about myself? And say, yeah, you did. And then it helps creating awareness, and then they can change it. And I'm sure you've experienced that many times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are not aware of what we say very often, and obviously the path to experiencing better things is to be more aware of what we say out loud, what we say to ourselves, because if we are aware of that, then we can notice the impact of that on our experience, and that's where our control really is, because we can see where our attention is focused, what we're encouraging, what we're highlighting, what words we're using, what things we're emphasizing. And when we can notice that, then we can shift that. We can emphasize more positive things rather than negative, be more encouraging rather than discouraging. We can, uplift ourselves rather than bring ourselves down. And all depends on how we talk to ourselves. Obviously, I would say a huge percentage of the population talks to themselves in a way that they would never talk to they would never think of themselves as talking, at least, to people they care a lot about. Like if they actually thought about how they would want to speak to someone they care a lot about, they would never speak to them the way that they speak to themselves. Although in reality, we end up speaking to the people we care a lot about exactly the way we're speaking to ourselves. So then obviously the self-image ends up misaligned with reality, because we don't think we would ever say such things, but we end up actually doing that regularly, because we're saying it to ourselves, and then we end up naturally saying it to the people around us. And as people trigger things that we're already triggered by in ourselves, and then we end up saying exactly the same things, reacting the same ways. But it's interesting you had said that, so there's the reaction to other people. I want to go back to, I'm tracing my thoughts back, because you had said something I wanted to respond to. Why don't you trace it back a little? Tell me, rewind a little. Tell me what you were just saying, and then it'll trigger what I was going to say.
So it was about, people not being aware of, well, as you say, us, because we are people as well, and we all work in the same way, not being aware of what we say, and how useful it was to have someone who can repeat the words that we use.
I remember. There's the idea of changing our beliefs. And the thing is that it seems like a really sort of fuzzy thing. Like, how do you change your beliefs? Because obviously we want to change our beliefs, when they're not positive and they're not empowering. But then it's like, okay, so what am I supposed to just tell myself something different, or tell myself something different enough times that I believe it? And that's what we end up thinking at first. But the only way we can actually change our beliefs is if we actually treat ourselves differently, we talk to ourselves differently, which you sort of connected with, whether you realize it or not, when you tied it into, the next thing you said was that the way we talk to ourselves, it's crazy the things that we say to ourselves. And then when it's repeated back, you realize, wow, I can't believe I said that. The thing is, if we're talking to ourselves in ways where that's the case, where we're shocked when we hear back the words we said, then we're certainly not going to feel powerful or empowered or in control of our lives. So the idea of shifting our beliefs so that we would feel more in control, more responsible in a good way for our experience, the only way we could do that, it's not like we could just say, I'm in control, I'm powerful enough times, because we would be talking over the fact that we also have been saying whatever other things we've been saying to ourselves that have been negative and discouraging and disempowering. And so, and ultimately, if we're not listening to what feels right, if you continue to go to a job where you're miserable and you know that you don't feel good, but you make no effort to improve the situation or, clarify what's next or anything, and you just keep forcing yourself to go each day, then no matter how many times you tell yourself, I'm powerful, I'm in control of my experience, then you're going to work the next day and then you feel miserable again. And then nothing actually changes in your feeling belief. You can say something, but you're not going to believe it unless you act as though it's true. Ultimately, that would mean that you'd want to empower yourself with the way that you talk to yourself and your actions and so forth. If you want to feel empowered, you can't just say, I am empowered, because then it's like yelling at someone and abusing them and talking down on them and then being like, you're the one who can control the experience you have, you are all powerful, and then the majority of your talk toward them is totally disempowering and negative. It's not going to mesh. And ultimately the few positive repeated remarks are not going to brainwash them into believing something different than what you're making them believe every moment of every day, throwing all sorts of negative talk at them. So, and forcing them to do things that they don't want to do and telling them, you have control over your life. Go do what you have to do now. Go do the thing I told you to do. That doesn't mesh. So if we want to change our beliefs, this applies to every belief, then we don't want to just say a different belief and be done with it and think that's enough, or say it repeatedly and think that's enough. We want to actually talk to ourselves and treat ourselves and listen to ourselves as though whatever we are now wanting to believe is true. And because if we treat ourselves as though we have power, if we actually listen to our feelings, and when it feels bad to do something, we don't do it. So we're empowering our feelings. If it feels good to do something, we do it. So we're empowering our feelings, that we decide what we want to feel and we listen to what feels good. Empowering our feelings, saying you have control. Well, now we're acting as though you have control, so if we actually work with ourselves, then we'll make ourselves feel much more in control. And then the idea that we're in control will resonate, because we'll be saying you're in control, I'm in control, but we'll also have been acting as though that's true. And our words and our actions and the rest of our self-talk will all align in that direction. And that's how we change beliefs. It's not, it's otherwise the whole idea of changing beliefs is seemingly an impossible task, because it sounds so good in theory, and then when you try to put it into practice, there's a missing link when you just try to force the belief to change and it doesn't work. The missing link is that we make our entire self-talk and action in life consistent with the new belief.
Yes, I think it really has to be connected with the body, because as you say, if you just repeat it, it's very intellectual and you actually don't feel it. And it's difficult to act in accordance with something that you don't feel. And that is really connected. I think, well, one thing that I find is really helpful is listening to tapes, and you have affirmations and you listen to that when you sleep or when you do something that, I don't know, you wash the dishes or something that doesn't require too much attention, so that the brain is occupied enough with an activity so that the affirmations can enter the subconscious mind. I think this is a kind of an easy and supportive way to do it, but then it has to be combined with releasing the fear that often goes with the idea that if I stop focusing on the problem, then the problem won't find any solution. And when we act as the person who has a new belief about themselves, then if I feel confident, then I won't be spending my day thinking about the conversation I will have with my colleague or my partner tomorrow, because I feel confident and I just know, well, it's going to be fine and that's it. And I will spend my day thinking about other things that I enjoy and that make me feel good. But to really act as though I am already this person, it means that I have to trust that if I stop thinking about how can I become more confident, I will actually become more confident. And this is very, I think for the mind, it's very conflicting, because we have this idea that if we focus really hard on something, then we're going to find the solution. And if we focus really hard on something, then that something is going to grow. So it actually doesn't work. But even if we know it doesn't work, we still keep doing it. And the way that I find, it's always the body that teaches to the mind. And so if every time that I think, oh, I have to go back to thinking about how becoming more confident, I can relax and just like really consciously relax the muscles in my body and breathe slowly and remind me that now I am a person who is totally confident. I can talk to anyone. Then okay, this is out of, I don't even have time for that. And then we do it again and again and again. And even if we have to do it like 10 times in 1 minute, we do it. And then the body starts absorbing this new feeling. Okay, if I don't focus on the problem, actually I feel good. And the natural byproduct is that I get what I want. And this is where sometimes we need faith, because it's easy to listen to this, but then when you have to apply, sometimes the fear that comes up is really overwhelming. And then you just have to say, okay, I trust. And even if I don't trust, still I trust and I do it.
It's interesting that the word faith there, because it's true, but it all depends on the perspective from which we look. Because as you were saying that, I was like, okay, yes, totally, that's where we need faith. But then I was like, but we don't need faith if we realize what our actual goal is. Because if our goal is to fix some problem or whatever, then yes, we need faith. If we focus on some other thing that makes us feel good, then the problem is going to somehow resolve itself, or we'll come up with a solution from that different emotional space or something. That does require some kind of faith that the problem will be resolved. But if we realize that the actual goal is the feeling we think we'll have if the quote unquote problem is resolved, then it doesn't require faith, because by thinking about it as a problem, we don't have the feeling we're going for. We know already that we're guaranteeing that we feel there is a problem, and that we do not feel settled or relaxed or whatever it is that we think we'll feel, confident, all the things that we think we'll feel if this problem were resolved, we guarantee that we don't feel as long as we're thinking about it as a problem that we haven't resolved. So if we actually focus on other things and focus on things that feel good, then we already feel more relaxed, more settled, more confident, more of whatever it is that we were going for by solving the problem. And so we actually already have what we want. No faith required. We guarantee the feeling that we're going for, which is the thing that we really want, because it's not really about the problem being resolved. It's about what we think we will be experiencing if the problem is resolved. So if we guarantee not having that experience, then how are we getting where we're going? And if we guarantee having the experience we're going for, then we're already there. And so obviously then doing what makes us feel good and shifting our focus of attention toward what actually feels good, there's no faith required. We guarantee what we actually want. Again, it's the only faith in the picture is if we think what we want is for that external thing to be resolved in a certain way. Because the actual thing we want is not that. Like when we really think it out and explore that, if we could feel what we want in some other way and the problem weren't resolved in the way that we think it needs to be resolved, we would actually have what we want. But if the problem is resolved in the way we think it needs to be resolved and we don't feel what we want, we wouldn't feel like we have what we want. So that means it can't be about the external thing. It's like if we say, I want to make $1 million, you could, like, what is it that we would want that for? Well, maybe I would feel more confident, more successful, more like I accomplished, I did something with my life. I don't know, whatever it is that you're going for with that. If that's the goal, it's really because there's an experience associated with it. But obviously it's possible to imagine a scenario where we have $1 million and don't feel confident, successful, like we've achieved anything. There are many ways to end up with $1 million and not feel that way. And and obviously, even if it's through a path that we thought would get us the $1 million and get us the feeling of achievement and everything else. And so considering we can have the $1 million and not feel confident, successful, settled, relaxed, whatever it is, like we've achieved something with our lives, whatever it is that we think we want, and considering we can feel confident, successful, relaxed, like we've achieved something with our lives without having the $1 million, then clearly it isn't the $1 million that we really want. And so we could either decide, well, I don't have it yet. I'm still not there. I'm frustrated that I don't have it. Well, now we're less confident, less feeling accomplished, less feeling like we've achieved what we want with our lives. And we're guaranteeing that we don't have what we want. Where if we were to focus more on the things that we have in our lives that are, making us feel wealthy or abundant or whatever else, like the good relationships we have, and the fact that we enjoy the career that we're, pursuing, or the good friendships, or a place that we live that we appreciate, or just like being in nature, like even if nothing else is seemingly going well, but we're just in nature and we're just feeling good and the sun's shining on our face, and it's like, well, I feel good here, or we're reading a book and it feels like, wow, I get to read, like I have some time to read. That's an accomplishment in itself. Whatever it is that makes us feel good and accomplished and successful, and like we've achieved something, whatever else, if we're feeling those things, we've already felt those things. So again, no faith required. We know we can either guarantee not feeling what we want to feel, which is really our goal, is to feel what we want to feel, or we can guarantee feeling what we want to feel, therefore guaranteeing achieving our goal. So when we actually identify what the true goal is, it changes our entire perception of how to go about achieving it.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's where it's important for people who use affirmations to, at some point, like just to be aware of the relationship that we have with affirmations. Because if we already have what we want, then we don't need to spend the day affirming what we want to be or what we want to have. So it can be a support in the sense that, okay, I want to get used to saying that I'm someone who is confident. But then there comes a moment where I have to admit that I'm confident enough and that I don't need to repeat this to myself every day. I think it's this question of codependency, and when we choose someone, or dependency on again, as you were saying, on an external source of support. And that's what I really like with coaching, is that it is showing people the resources that they have in themselves. And it's useful to have someone to guide us, or to say, well, have you tried to go in that direction? But ultimately we have it inside. And I think it's important to pay attention to the tools, or the resources or people that we use, and to check what is the relationship that I have with this. Do I use it in a way that brings me more freedom, or is it just another way to getting myself trapped into something else? Like I jump out of this box into another box, and that's not the objective.
It's interesting. Obviously, when we're in a certain emotional space, we use everything to support that emotional space. So, like you could decide everyone's attacking you, and then go talk to your coach and decide your coach is attacking you. And there's no way around that, because you're deciding that that's your experience. And then everyone you bring into that picture is going to feel like it's supporting that experience. Then suddenly your significant other is attacking you, and your best friends attack you, and your family, some other family members attacking you. And there's no way around it. If you are feeling attacked, you're going to feel attacked. The key would be to change the feeling first. So, because like what you're saying, you could bring any tools into the picture and they'll just support what you're already doing. So if you're approaching things in a way that's coming from a not good feeling space, you can just add all sorts of tools to that, but you're just adding logs on the fire of the negative feelings. You're not actually fueling positive feelings unless you shift the emotional direction and act from that space. And so it's not like, contrary to our often belief, it's not like we can just go out into the world and expect to fix our feelings. It's not like if we just we talk to a certain person, guaranteed we will feel different, or we apply these tools in this way. Like, if that's what feels right, that would be a good idea. But sometimes, the the very same tools, we can, without even realizing it, manipulate them and use them toward our own sort of egoic aims, without realizing that we're doing that, when ultimately we want to be using the tools toward positive aims. So, like, even the idea of positive affirmations, like, it can be used in a way that's extremely positive, or it could be used in a way that's extremely negative. We could actually be reinforcing all of the things that we're not wanting to experience by listening to positive affirmations, which you sort of like hinted at, the direction you were going. Because you can't just listen to positive affirmations all day and do nothing to change your life, or you will feel like there are all these lies that you're being bombarded with constantly, and it will just reinforce a really negative experience for you, because then you'll start reacting to all of the positive affirmations and be like, well, that's not true, and that's not true, and that's not true, and now you're actually putting energy into the opposite thing compared to what you want. Because instead of saying, I am confident, yeah, right, like, that's, that now the energy that you're giving there is not the I'm confident energy, it's the I'm not confident, how could I believe that statement energy. And so, ultimately, the positive affirmations used in the right context, just like anything else that has any potential benefit, is, can be really good, because they start shifting our thinking in a different direction. But if they are being used to talk over things that we are not listening to, and acknowledging and changing in ourselves, in terms of, like, if we're getting a clear like, if the GPS is saying turn right, recalculating, turn right, recalculating, go straight, recalculating, and we're just refusing to listen, and then we're like, I turn all the right times, I go exactly the right directions in my life, and the GPS is like, are you serious? Like, I've been recalculating for the last, 50 miles. When did you go all the right turns? I don't believe you at all. Like, obviously you're going to get all this internal backlash for everything that you say if you don't act as though what you're saying is true. Like, meaning, like, you've got to actually change, you've got to listen and acknowledge the things that come up that don't resonate with the things you're trying to say that are more positive. And, like, all the backlash you actually want to respond to and change the way you live and talk to yourself and act, so that you are living in accordance with that new statement, but also having acknowledged the I don't believe that statement. Because if you don't acknowledge those feelings of I don't believe that statement, then saying that statement over and over again is not going to convince you, it's going to aggravate you, like, it's going to irritate the fact that you have this open wound, and you're like trying to heal it by just like putting this huge bandage over it while it, festers beneath the bandage, when you really need to heal the wound. And then like, the bandage can be beneficial in the healing of the wound, but you need to do something to heal the wound too. And then, after you've cleaned it out, you've, taken care of it, you've done what you need to do, then putting the bandage on can be very beneficial, and obviously assuming it's a sterile bandage and all these other things, like, because there's so many ways you can go wrong doing the supposedly right thing. And it all depends on, like, the context of it. If everything about what you're doing fits your aim, then you're good. If anything about what you're doing doesn't fit your aim, then you're going to want to address that. Or the other things you're doing repeated over and over again will eventually actually stir up more issues, because it's like, why are you not listening to the fact that this thing needs to be changed to make it compatible with this thing that you just keep repeating over and over again and bombarding me with, so we really want to treat ourselves as though positive affirmations are true, rather than just repeat positive affirmations. That would be like, cleaning and dressing and, healing, like actually doing the things to heal the wound and putting a nice sterile bandage on top with love. Like that's what we really want to do to ourselves, and not just be like, I slapped a dirty bandage on you, you should be fine, you're good, like, I took care of you. I'm done, look, I take care of myself. That obviously wouldn't resonate.
No, it really requires a lot of self-love, and of saying, okay, there is this fear or unpleasant feeling that is here, and it is asking for my attention, it is calling for my attention, and it just wants to be heard, and give attention to this. And we can accept that we did things the way we did them because that's what we knew, and now we're learning something else, we're learning a different way, but it's going to go much faster if we can remove the shame and remove the blame, and then just say, okay, I feel this, there is this fear, or I have done this again, but then, yeah, I did it again, but I can also celebrate the fact that I noticed that I did that thing again, that I entered in the old pattern once again, but now I'm aware of it. And then seeing all those things that we could interpret as a failure, or I did it again. No, I did it again, and I am aware of it. And next time it won't happen, or if it happens, I will become aware much quicker, or I will be able to feel that I'm going in that direction and then step back. And the more we can give ourselves love and celebrate, and then realize that all those things, all those blocks, resistance, fears that are coming in the way are a sign that we're doing the work. And then the more we can say, I see you and I hear you, and you are welcome to be here, but I'm going to show you a different way of doing things, and you come with me, then it becomes easy to shift the focus and say, okay, so now that we're together, and I know you're scared, but I'm going to show you a different way and in a different direction, and look at this wonderful place where we're going to, then it becomes easy to relax and to say that, okay, now that I'm the person who goes in that direction, and I know I can take care of this part of me, well, then what do I think about? I don't have to worry the whole day anymore, and I can think of the nice place that I'm going to visit, and there will be nice people and nice food, and I'll discover new things, and I can anticipate with joy those things. And then naturally, just because I stop thinking of the rest, then they disappear of my awareness, and they disappear of my reality as well. And I don't have to do any effort for that. And that's what's beautiful, because we can actually do all this heavy work in a way that is so nice and pleasant, and that makes us feel good. Because in the end, when we can wake up in the morning and say, wow, I'm alive, I'm grateful for that, I'm a wonderful person, and everything is just mirroring this in me, and I didn't do anything about this heavy stuff from the past, or even from yesterday. It just faded away because I gave myself love and attention. And it's and the only way to really feel that it's true is to try, and to know that sometimes it's going to be hard, but that it doesn't have to be that hard. It doesn't have to take that much time. These are also all conditionings that we have. And then we can decide for ourselves, okay, I decide that for me, it's not going to be that hard. It's not going to take that long. That's my decision. That's the experiment that I want to make. And if someone has a different opinion, and that someone is often the inner critic. It doesn't have much to do with other people. It has to do with the inner conversation that we were talking about before. So I find that it's useful to say, well, I've heard you, but I have a different opinion, and I will do it my way. And then we decide that we have no space and no time in our head for this inner conversation. I'm not going to start to explain or justify or argue, or I'm not entering this conversation, but I heard that you were telling me this. And if we can have this inner dialogue, then it makes it so much easier, because we don't waste energy in trying to convince this part of us that is scared. It is scared, and it is scared for a good reason. So if we can just say that, I know you're scared and you have the right to be scared, but I'm showing you something different. And I invite you to come with me and try this and see for yourself. And when we have this inner conversation, I find that the resistance melts, because this part of us that wants to be seen and protected and held, it gets what it wants. And then we can move on with the things that the other more resource part of us wants. And then it becomes really nice and actually quite easy and quite fast.
It's interesting, because here's another example where I would say that will work up to a point, and then it would require another step, because ultimately self-love is the solution. So like, obviously that's already on the right track, and that then does resolve most things, because most things are caused by us not caring for ourselves in some way or other. So obviously we can accidentally solve the problem if we just are more loving toward ourselves in genuine ways. Ultimately, which obviously then goes back to the problem can actually be resolved without us directly resolving the problem, because it's like if a kid is acting out, sometimes most of the time all the kid wants is more attention. And if you give positive attention, more attention, the kid stops acting out. It's not because you punished him more, it's not because you disciplined him more, it's because you gave him more positive attention. And then almost by accident, because it wasn't really by accident, you resolved the problem. It's, indirectly, you actually directly resolve the problem, because you're not trying to solve the kid, you're trying to love the kid. So that part I completely agree with. The conversation with yourself I would tweak, because obviously our internal, we would appreciate any more positive attention we would get from someone than we have been getting. But it doesn't mean it's all of what we want, ultimately. Meaning, like, if someone actually engages us in conversation when they haven't been engaging us in conversation, and they're willing to make an effort to listen to us when they haven't been making an effort to listen to us, then we're already going to feel much better, because, wow, this person actually cares. But obviously, if that repeats itself but doesn't improve, meaning like they're making an effort to listen, but they're not really getting what we're saying, then at first it feels good because they're making an effort to listen. And if that becomes the norm, that they just keep making an effort to listen, but they're clearly not getting what we're saying, and they keep acting according to whatever they're acting according to, but they're not really getting what we're saying, making changes accordingly, responding to our actual words, then what felt really good and felt like progress initially eventually feels like we're not going anywhere, because I really appreciate I was getting more attention from you when you were listening, but you're not really listening because you don't really get what I'm saying. So like, now it doesn't feel like progress anymore, because we just keep doing the same thing that was once progress. It's no longer progress. I want to actually be understood too. Like, I want you to listen in a way that you understand, like make more of an effort to get what I'm saying. So the fear idea, like the in the conversation that you described, if there's fear, then there's something to be acknowledged about how we've made ourselves feel. So to say, or any feeling for that matter, if we say, I hear you, I want to show you something different, I hear your perspective, or I hear your opinion, I disagree, we're not really getting what's being said, because we actually would always agree. Meaning, that would be like saying to someone, I know you've just told me that you're really upset, I disagree. Like that doesn't make sense. Like, at first it would feel like, wow, good, this person's listening to me, but it'd be like, some of the things this person's saying is a little bit off. Because when I say I feel something and they say they disagree, I don't really get it, because how could they disagree? I feel this. What do you say? So the thing is, it's, if our internal guidance is saying to us, I'm scared, then there's a reason that it's scared. And if we ask, why are you scared? And we explore that, ultimately, then we might get, associations with external things. We could decide, oh, conditioning, oh, because these past experiences, except that if everything is a mirror, then that was all us, meaning like that was all showing us how we've made ourselves feel, meaning then we get clear about how we've made ourselves feel scared. So then we could acknowledge, wow, I'm sorry I made you feel scared. I want to make you feel, confident that things will go well with me, or, make you feel like you can relax, rather than say, I hear you, I disagree. Let me show you another way. That wouldn't make sense, because if we're the ones who made ourselves scared, it would be like in a relationship with someone, someone's like, I really feel like you just don't get me, you're not understanding me, you don't treat me the way I want to be treated, I don't feel cared enough by you. And you say, I disagree. I hear you, I disagree. Like, obviously that relationship is not going to go very far until that dialogue changes. And then obviously, yeah, then it's like, let me show you another way. It's like, what do you mean another way? Could you acknowledge the fact that I just said I don't feel like understood or listened to or cared about by you? Well, let me show you another way. Obviously, it wouldn't, at first it would be like, I appreciate that you're talking to me, because that's progress, but what do you mean you're going to show me another? Why don't you acknowledge what I said? Like, I'm bringing up a concern. Let's address the concern, and we can go forward. Like act like you care. And it goes back to the responsibility experience and the self-care, like what those things really mean. Because if we're responsible for our experience, it would never make sense to say, I disagree, or let me show you another way. Because if we're responsible for our experience, we've made ourselves feel those things, and we'd want to respond accordingly. So actually being responsible, obviously, all these things we say, everyone says we say all these things, all these good, lessons and messages out there, like be responsible for your own experience. But there's so many nuances of what that actually means, and we have all of life to figure it out, lifetime. So, and that same thing with self-care. It's like, love yourself. Well, what does that mean? Like, it's like on a shirt and a mug and it's everywhere, except that, like, so then people are like, I go to the beach every day, therefore I love myself. Like, I'm loving myself. Look at how I'm loving myself. Well, that's great, but if your internal guidance is like, can we stop going to this job? Can we stop being in this relationship? Can we finally start doing this thing that we said we wanted? Like, we want to spend more time with friends or whatever. And we say, but I go to the beach, so I'm clearly taking care of you. Like that doesn't make any sense. Obviously, there are things that we feel good doing, but it doesn't mean that that's everything there is to taking care of yourself. It would be like saying that, if you feed a baby, you're done. Like, that's it. No other care required. Like, it wouldn't work. You'd be a really miserable parent. Like obviously love involves a whole bunch of things, like in terms of like caring for love. So self-care, self-love obviously requires actually attending to all the needs that are there, physical, emotional, etc., in the ways that they're being expressed. And it wouldn't be saying, I disagree that you're something other than hungry. Let me show you another way. Like to the child, like to the baby, it's like I'm just going to keep giving you food because that's always the solution. That's solution to every problem. Like, I'm always caring for you. Look, I feed you. You cry, I feed you. What are you still crying for? What's wrong with you? Let me show you another way. Like, I hear you, but I disagree. You're really hungry. Like that, like, obviously wouldn't make sense. So ultimately we'd want to be asking, what is it that you really want? If there's a concern here, like, it might not be food that's the answer. It might not be like, positive affirmations that's the answer. It might not be that I need to like go do this thing that I really thought I needed to do. That might not be the answer. The solution I thought I came up with might not be the solution. And I want to actually listen to what the concerns are. So if there is fear, I want to listen to what that fear is about, and then recognize anything that comes up, it's a mirror of what I've made myself feel. And then I want to take responsibility, back to the responsibility, because if I don't take responsibility, then how am I going to change it? If your internal partner is saying, you've made me feel X, Y, and Z, and you say, I'm going to do this anyway because I disagree with you, then like you're not on the same page. There's no unity. So again, while that might have led to better feelings when the first few times you did it, if you were to keep repeating that, because the first few times it was progress, because you were at least making more of an effort to create a dialogue, which is important because you want a dialogue, because how are you going to ever hear what's being said if you don't have a dialogue? But if that dialogue involves you dismissing what's being said or deciding that you know better in some way, shape, or form, whether you realize that's what you're doing or not, then like rather than acknowledging this feeling is valid, no matter what it is, it's valid. It's not about the outside things that it seems to be about, it's about me. And in that way, it's valid. Like I've made myself feel this, that's why I feel this. If I'm actually responsible, if the world is a mirror supporting me and showing me what I've made myself feel, whatever I'm feeling is completely true and valid. It's just not about any of the things it seems to be about. And in that way, I could say, oh, that's not valid. But ultimately, I would say the feeling is entirely valid. It's just not about those things. And then I would say, how have I made myself feel this? And how could I change this? Because I would really like to make myself feel what I want to feel. And I wouldn't say, I have a different perspective or, you know, I disagree with you. We'd say, I hear what you're saying. I entirely agree that what you're saying is valid. And I realize that in some way I've made you feel it. And I really want to change that. And it's not, I want to show you another way as much as I want to actually make you feel much better. Like, you know, if you're feeling scared, I want to make you feel confident. If you're feeling, you know, and safe, you know, if you're feeling like you don't feel safe, I want to make you feel safe, relax, like you can relax. If you're feeling like you always need to be working harder, I want to make you feel like it can be easier. If you're like what you mentioned that, you know, rather than the idea that it's conditioning, well, that's again would be, if we're really living based on the idea that life is a mirror, then we're the ones who conditioned it. You know, obviously the world just helped. It showed us what we were doing when we did something, and then it did more that to us, and then we did it again, and then it did more of that to us, and we did it again. And so if we decide, well, we feel we were just conditioned to feel this way, then we really ought to be saying, okay, how have we conditioned ourselves to feel this way? How have I conditioned myself to feel this way? How have I been treating myself in a way consistently that this would be something that it would make sense for me to feel? And how could I change that so I could make myself feel more confident that we're on the same page? Because if there's disagreement, then there isn't on the same pageness. And obviously, if you and your GPS are on different pages, you're not going to have a really pleasant drive because it's going to be a lot of recalculating. So, you know, you want to be on the same page. Like you want to make sure that the destination you plugged in is the one that it's in agreement. Like, okay, we are going to this destination. This is actually like, you know, you've addressed these other destinations. It's not like you plugged in this address with a positive affirmation, but you had all these other addresses plugged in that are the other direction with all these other negative affirmations. And like, I don't really know which way we're going. I'm terrified because you seem to just be driving and I still don't have directions to give you because you said we're going toward insecurity and unsafeness. And we're also going toward, I'm confident and everything is good, you know? And like, I don't know which way, what are we doing here? I'm terrified. Where are we going? And then we're like, well, I disagree with you. Let me show you another way. Obviously you see in that context, we would probably create more problems. So, you know, when ultimately what we really want to say is, I want to get on the same page as you, you know, like I want us to be on the same page. So I want to hear what you're saying. I want to hear what your concerns are. I want to recognize they're about me. They're not about anything else. So then I want to validate those concerns as being valid about me and what I've made you feel. And then I want to say, you know, I realize I've made you feel this and I want to make you feel this other thing. And how can I do that? And how can we get on that page? And what else would what other concerns would you want me to address so that so we could be on the same page, knowing what direction we're going, because we've agreed on a destination as being the destination rather than that it still has all these conflicting destinations that we plugged in, that we're able to say, yeah, no, not that one. I'm sorry, I plugged that one in. Yeah, no, I didn't intend like that whole unsafe thing. No, the like insecurity. No, yeah, I agree. I don't want to be repeating that to you anymore. Like, you know, confidence. Yes, I do want confidence. That would be good. And I'm sorry I made you feel insecure when I totally ignored the fact that you were telling me that you were scared and I just did it anyway. Like, sorry about that. Didn't intend that. I didn't even know what I was doing. You know, like, and we could have that conversation, which actually is like, let's get on the same page before we act conversation. so that we can not have recalculating endlessly GPS. And as opposed to, I know we're on different pages, I'm going anyway. Let me just show you, because obviously then it's like, I'll drive and I'll show you that I know where I'm going. But then the GPS is like, so then what's my role here? So clearly we haven't resolved anything. I feel purposeless. I feel unsafe. I don't know where we're going. And it's like, be quiet. I'll show you. We're good. Don't worry. And you can see that you're just going to create more of a need for dialogue if you have an invalidating dialogue, when we really want to have a validating dialogue. In the best possible way, where we realize that every feeling actually has good reason to be there.
Yes.
And is telling us something, and there's no place for us to disagree with it. There's only a place for us to acknowledge, validate, take responsibility, and redirect to what we would like to be making ourselves feel instead going forward. And then asking ourselves how we could do that. Obviously asking ourselves, how do we make ourselves feel those less good things? And how can we make ourselves feel these better things? Because the memories, the thoughts, the things will pop into our head. We'll have experiences in our lives, which goes back to what you said, that, when we make a mistake again, it's in a new context, or we go a certain direction, we do something that we otherwise would regret. It's in a new context. And like you said, we can learn from it, because we're not in the same place we were in when we did it last time. And so it wasn't like autopilot, we're just doing this, or I think this is the best way. It's like we have more hesitations, we have our awareness, we have like things going on inside us where we're seeing what's going on, we're seeing we're doing something that we don't want to be doing, or afterward we see, wow, that totally doesn't fit what I'm trying to accomplish. That's more like what I used to do in the past. And like you said, reframing how we look at that, rather than, oh, I can't change, that we are able to say, like, obviously there's so much more awareness in me now of what's going on here, and how I end up with these kinds of results, and what I'm doing that's leading to them. Again, back to the responsibility, taking responsibility, what I'm doing that's leading to these results, and what I could specifically do differently next time. And I'm so glad that I'm more aware of this, because clearly this is progress, this is growth, this is change, and is hope that I can do something different next time, because I can see, having done it again in this new space in my life with this new awareness, I see even more clearly what I would want to be changing next time. And without having repeated seemingly the less good action or behavior or whatever, I wouldn't have this level of awareness of exactly what I do and where I do it, and where I'm, what's leading me astray from the actual experience that I'm going for, and what would be more on track. And then obviously it's, obviously when we're doing something that isn't good on autopilot, the next step is to bring more awareness to it. And then when we have more awareness, we can like see what we could change. And then the next step is to make changes. And obviously it doesn't mean we're perfect, but then the next step is to make more changes, so, obviously that's the progression of growth. If we could acknowledge that progression, like you said, to be able to see that, like, we are more aware this time, we have learned something from it this time in a way that we didn't last time, because we were able to see it with this new awareness, a new perspective, a new place in our lives. That is change. That's how change occurs. That's how progress happens. That's how growth happens. So for us to decide we didn't change because we didn't change externally yet would be to fail to recognize the growth process as it necessarily occurs. That we do it again, but we are more aware, and then we can see what we're changing this time definitively and why. And that's important. Otherwise, we would never be able to make changes with any confidence, because we wouldn't see what changes are necessary. So.
Yes. And I totally agree. Everything that we feel is valid and legit and is here for a good reason. And I think the difference in the two speeches that we were illustrating is that I believe we have two different internal interlocutors, and one is the ego, and that's the kind of conversation that I was having, and you were having a conversation with the inner guidance, or something that is more around the inner child, or whatever name you want to give to this. And I think it's a constant play between these two conversations, because there are two different interlocutors. And of course, as long as we don't give love and attention and validate the fact that this is how I feel. And I have every right to feel like this because this is how I feel. So I'm not going to fight with reality. And that is what is calling for loving attention. And when the ego comes in and starts telling stories like, yeah, blah, 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 you're not able to do this, it's never going to work and all this, it's a different part of us. And of course, it's somehow connected to the fear that hasn't been acknowledged and taken care of in this more, it feels like softer part of us. But I really feel them as two different parts. And that's why the vocabulary and the type of conversation is different. But this deep knowing and inner wisdom is the one that has to be listened to and that has to be taken care of, and whatever it says is right. And I think that's the fundamental difference, is that this inner knowing is always telling the truth and we can feel it physically. Whereas the ego is more of a speech and it's telling lies because it's scared. So it doesn't have any bad intention, but I find it requires a bit a different type of conversation. Whereas this feeling, it is always true, it is always legit. And as you say, obviously it's not going to work if we say, yeah, you feel this, but I don't agree with what you're feeling. No, I feel this, I feel it, and that's it. And so I think that's where the difference comes in, because it's two different types of interlocutors or conversations.
I sort of got that you were saying that. So then this gets back to something I think I mentioned one of the previous conversations, and it's interesting because it ties in here, leads to interesting discussion here, because love solves everything ultimately. And obviously, like, even the way you presented the ego, that it's like trying to convince us of something because it's trying to make up for something or whatever else. If it's trying to make up for something, then dismissing it will only give it more reason to try to make up for something. If it's not confident, if it's, it's saying things that are not nice because it's not getting attention, then giving it less attention is only going to make it say more things that are not nice. And that's if we were thinking of it as the ego, the way you presented it. But I would want to challenge it, and something that, like I said, I think I mentioned it in one of the previous calls, but the way that I see it, like, most cultures have that duality. Like there's like the good angel and the bad angel, like on your shoulders, and like the Hasatan versus the like the good force, like that there's like Satan and a good force, that there's the devil and God, that there's actually evil and good. And the way that I see it, it's like in that the way that I presented it the other call, that there's a Native American myth or story that grandfather is telling his grandson, there are two wolves within us. One is greed, hatred, anger, delusion, etc., and the other one is love, generosity, kindness, etc. And the grandson, and the grandfather says, and they're fighting within us all the time. And the grandson asks which wolf wins, and the grandfather says, the one you feed. And that's the way I've seen it in most cultures. But I disagree, because going back to this love idea, rather than focusing on the problem, that the problem is not an entity in itself. It's like, there's light, there's darkness, but there isn't. There's light and the absence of light. That there isn't good and evil, there's good in the absence of good. That in this metaphor, it's not that there are two wolves fighting and that the one you feed is the one that wins. It's that there's one wolf, and if you starve it and beat it and abuse it, then it will fight you, and it will seem like greed, hatred, anger, delusion, for good reason. It will act out in defense of its survival against you. It will be your enemy. But if you feed it and take care of it and love it and pet it and are kind to it, then it will be your best friend, your best companion. It will seem like love, generosity, kindness, etc. In other words, there's one wolf, You can take care of it, or you can not take care of it. You could love it, the whole self-care idea, or you could not. And that will determine the experience you have of it. So what you described as the two voices within us, I like, ultimately the way I see it, there's only our voice and that wolf, meaning like that, which is our internal guidance, which will act out if we are not listening, and will seem really negative, and we'll start saying all these bad things if we are not giving it what it's wanting. Like if a GPS were sentient and had feelings, then and we you know are totally ignoring its existence, because we plugged in some kind of address and it directs us, and we just keep ignoring its direct. It says turn right, we go left. It says turn straight, we turn some other direction. And like eventually that GPS, imagine it was like a passenger in the car. We said, come join me on this road trip so you could help give me directions. And then the passenger says turn right here, and we turn left, and they say go straight here, and we go backward. Then we're the passenger at some point is going to be like, why did you bring me on this road trip? What is my purpose here? You specifically said you wanted me to help you with directions. You said where you want to go. I'm giving you the directions. You are specifically ignoring my directions. You are acting like I'm not even here, and I don't know what my purpose is. And then if we continue to ignore it, it's going to be screaming. That passenger is going to be screaming at us, because it's going to be pretty upset. That person is going to be pretty upset. That's our GPS. That's that one wolf. So we could look at it as different voices, but then we're only going to continue to not acknowledge what's really being said, because we're going to end up deciding that it's not worth listening to something while it's worth listening to some other thing. And what makes one thing worth listening to, another thing not? It's like saying the kid is acting out, so I'm going to ignore him. Well, if he's acting out because we haven't been taking care of him and like meeting some important need in some way, then to further ignore him would be to further aggravate the problem, even though we're like, oh, I only pay attention when he's good. Like, okay, but when he's not good, then it's showing you that you haven't been paying attention to him enough when he's doing something good. So clearly there's some need for something here. And it's not that you should just say, I choose not to pay attention to you because you're being bad. Like, there's more to that picture, because it's really, why is there this acting out existing? Why is this, are these words existing in me? Are these feelings existing in me? Why are these thoughts existing in me in the first place? And to recognize that if it's automatic, then it's speaking to us about us. And it's saying that because of things we've done to us. And it's not that we should selectively love some of the voice and not all of the voice, because we're actually asking for more problems if we do so, when again, everything in us is saying something, because from my perspective, it's actually all coming from that same wolf, unless it's us speaking, and that's a whole different story, because there's us and the wolf. If we're the ones saying negative things, then rather than say we disagree, which doesn't really make sense, we ought to say something different. If we're the ones throwing verbal abuse at ourselves or discouragement, then we probably want to be like, wow, I'm sorry I've been so discouraging and abusive or whatever, and I really want to change that. Like, I would never have wanted to have said something like that to you. And going back to the self-care, self-love, and I really want to be much more caring, loving, attentive, kind. Like, that is not the way I want to talk to you. So from my perspective, there is no voice, there is no like greedy wolf. There's only that wolf. You either make it your friend or you make it your enemy. And you're the one who is the enemy if you're making it your enemy. Because why would you do that to yourself? You have this great potential loyal companion, and you would abuse it, talk to it terribly, starve it, like, what are you doing? Like, then you're the enemy. And obviously then it's for us to take responsibility. Wow, sorry I would ever talk to myself this way. I don't want to anymore, because clearly this is not compatible with any of my aims, where I say I want to be loving toward myself, where I say I want a better experience of life, and then I'm talking to myself like this. I want to change that. And it's not to blame ourselves. It's interesting, you had mentioned blame and shame. Shame comes from blame. We're the ones blaming. Our internal guidance, that wolf, is the one that would feel shame. We are the blamers if there's blame. Otherwise, there's no blame.
Mm-hmm.
And then there would be no shame if there's no blame. So ultimately, we have it in our hands to change our experience all the time at any moment, because we can change our end of the dialogue, because the wolf just wants to be our friend ultimately in this scenario. If we treat it well, we will have a really good friend. And if we don't, that's on us. And whatever we get makes sense. Like whatever we get back based on what we're giving out, that makes sense. It's like if you abuse all your friends and then you lose your friends, well, that was you. You could change how you're treating your friends. Now, obviously, that starts with how you change how you treat yourself. Then you could treat your friends differently. But in that scenario, because we're talking about external things, but if we're talking about internal stuff, that internal wolf, it's all on you, because which again is back to the responsibility, not blame. It's all on you in the sense that you get to set the dynamic. You set the stage. You decide whether you cultivate a good friendship or an enemy in this situation. It's totally up to you how you talk to yourself. And if you hear yourself saying something you don't want to be saying, then you ought to be saying, wow, I'm sorry I said that, and this is what I want to be saying instead. That's how I see it. And it's not that there are these two other voices that we're observing and we should selectively love and selectively listen and selectively agree. We're actually just setting ourselves up, from my perspective, for failure there, because we're treating the wolf as though sometimes it's a mean wolf, sometimes it's a greedy wolf, sometimes it's a hating wolf. Well, now we're not going to get as loyal and friendly a companion, because sometimes we yell at it, sometimes we're nice, sometimes we starve it, sometimes we feed it. It's like, well, when you were being bad, I treated you like the bad wolf, and when you were being good, I treated you like the good. Like obviously raising kids that way is really, there are people who do it. It's not a good idea. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you're being the bad kid, I'm going to treat you like the bad kid. You're being the good kid, I'm going to treat you like the good kid. It's your choice. Like, well, if you're not going to treat them like the good kid all the time, they're going to sometimes be bad kids, because they will be what you treat them like. There's a really amazing movie, Freedom Writers, which I saw for like, I don't know, the fifth time more recently, because it came out a long time ago already. But if you haven't seen it, it's totally worth watching. I mean, more than worth watching. But ultimately, the reason I'm bringing it up is there's this person, it's a true story, it's based on a true story. This teacher goes into a school, she doesn't know what she's getting herself into, but she has these like idealistic notions that she's going into this school where there are all these gangs, there are all these, everyone like actually is in danger for their lives, even in school. And she has this notion that she wants to, she's gonna have the class that has the worst of the kids, but she's going to treat them really well, and she's gonna she wants to like teach them things and everything else. And meanwhile, they're not coming to learn. They don't even want to show up to school, and sometimes they don't. They need like a guard in the hallway to make sure that like fights don't lead to murder and stuff. And like it's an absolutely insane environment. And meanwhile, the teachers, the principal, etc., they all decide these kids are not worth saving. Like just deal with, like, get your experience as a teacher, like you'll move up, and like you don't need to like actually teach them because they're not interested in learning. So treat them as though they're not interested in learning. And she's like, look at the books you want me to give them. You want me to give them these like torn up children's versions of the books? Why don't we give them the like brand new real versions of the books and treat them like they're worth it? And the principal or the head teacher or whatever she is, she's like, you can't give them that. They don't deserve it, and they'll just destroy it anyway, and they'll throw it out and whatever. And like she's like, how are we going to change them or teach them or anything if we're basically saying we don't like them, we don't believe in them, we don't like expect that they're going to learn anything, and we're just waiting for them to like stop coming to school or go and kill each other. Like, how is that going to be helpful to the situation if we treat them in that way? Because that's what we've seen. Why don't we treat them like we would want them to be, basically? And that's what she ended up doing, and she transformed. It was like a very like tear-jerking, very emotional, like amazing growth transformation for all the kids, where that became their safe space, because she treated them, she was the only one who really treated them like they were better. And they became better because she treated them like they were better. And so that goes back to what I'm saying, that we really want to treat everything we hear within ourselves as though it's good, if we want it to be good, if we want like it to lead to better things. Because if we treat it like we see it, then we're gonna be encouraging more of the less good things, and also some more of the good things. But because we're encouraging the less good things, and in my interpretation, it's all one wolf, you're not going to build as good a relationship with that wolf. You're not going to build as good a relationship with that person within. If sometimes you treat them terribly because they said things you didn't like to hear, and sometimes you treat them well because you think those are the things they're supposed to be saying, and that's not a safe space for anyone. And if we were to instead create a safe space within us at all times for anything to be aired, and recognize that if it is said, then like either we're speaking and we ought to change what we're saying, or we're hearing the response and we want to hear it out and actually respond as though we believe and love this, we believe in and love this source of this voice, and that ultimately that it could be better, that whatever seems less good, that we don't treat it like, oh, that's a bad thing. Obviously there's this like last point on this, I want to hear your response, but that there's this idea when we have like positive affirmations and things like this, there's often this idea in the self-help world, and it's like, positive thinking is good, negative thinking is bad. And it's true that you're going to manifest what you're thinking, except that not acknowledging negative thinking is like riding your bike, looking at the pole you don't want to crash into, and just being positive. And then you're still headed toward the pole, and you're still going to crash into it, and nothing is going to change except that you were trying to be positive. And then obviously eventually you're going to be pretty negative again when you keep crashing into the pole, and you were trying so hard to be positive, and you're like, well, nothing's changing, because you didn't actually acknowledge the fact that you're headed toward a pole and figure out where you could go instead. You just kept trying to be positive while you headed toward the pole, like with also, bombarding yourself with positive affirmations. That's not going to help you stop crashing into the pole by itself. You also want to turn the wheel, which you can only do if you look a different direction, because if you just turn the wheel, you don't know where you're turning it to if you're still staring at the pole, and you might crash into something else. So you actually want to look around, see where you want to go instead of the pole, and then decide where you want to go and look there, and you'll naturally steer there. But that's us changing the dynamic with us, because we're willing to say, I hear what's being said, I want to hear it out, I don't want to talk over it, I don't want to ignore it while it's saying something about where I'm headed. It's the GPS, it's telling me where I'm headed. I want to actually work it out and treat it like I want to, like I want a good companion here for the journey.
I really like the story or the image of the one wolf, and I think this is like the next step in self-awareness, is that in the beginning you have just to become aware of this internal conversation and the conflict that there can be, and then once you can see that these two elements are just different, they're just the same thing but from a different perspective, and then you get what you were saying before, is that love is the solution, because love is what dissolves the opposition or the division, and that is when, and I liked also the image of the kid, is like unconditional love. I love you whatever you do, and then we can see that there are things that are nicer to do than others, but my love is still there. And I think it's a gradual awareness that, well, we all have different journeys, but I think many people at the beginning, they need to become aware of this conversation, and of how it can be really, really subtle. So it takes a bit of time, and then expand to this level where, as you were describing it, it's just one thing, and because everything and everyone is just one thing and one awareness and consciousness, and then you get to this place where you can, where everything is love inside and outside. Yes. Mm.
And notice this goes back to the problem idea, because there is no problem. The only reason there seems to be a problem is that we give energy to the idea that there's a problem. But it's like the idea that there's not two wolves, there's one wolf that we ought to be treating with love. There is no problem. There's stuff to be acknowledged, and then decide, further clarify, where do we want to go instead. It's like, there are poles, but it doesn't mean they're problems inherently. We could crash into them, but we could also use them to clarify where we want to go instead before we crash into them, or after, if we didn't do it earlier. So, that we can actually use everything to clarify how it could be better, how we could experience better, how we could be treating ourselves better, what could be a better experience for us, etc. And if we are using it all in that way, always encouraging toward a better experience, always giving love to the situation, essentially, like loving attentiveness to the situation, there is no problem. They're just clarifying experiences, like they're all helping us, like the poles, figure out where we really want to go, because we could stare at them and actually crash into them, actually have problems, or we can, obviously staring at them just builds up all this internal negative energy and forcefulness and everything else, or we could decide from them what would be better, and what is an experience we'd prefer to have, or what do we believe, if we had already resolved this problem, what do we believe we would feel, like that we could actually use those experiences to fuel the solution rather than to continue to fuel the problem that we see. Because again, there are no problems. It's not a duality. It's not like there are problems and there are solutions. There are only solutions, and solutions that haven't been manifested yet. like that we could be learning from. Like the problem itself is in some ways a solution, because it's helping us steer toward better. The things that come up in our lives are not just there just because they're mirrors of how we've been making ourselves feel. And when we see them and we see something that we don't like that much, then we could say, well, what would I prefer instead of this? And then those seeming problems are so beneficial, because they show us what better could be, because they help us imagine what better could be, because they're there and we see, well, I don't like this, what would I like instead? And that contrast shows us, what we have been making ourselves feel and what we'd like to be making ourselves feel, because the problem shows us an opportunity where we can say, what do I imagine I would feel if there were no problem? And like you said, that the idea that, imagining that there is no problem and acting that way, and obviously not ignoring it, but actually doing other things that make us feel better, and coming at it when we're not feeling that it's a problem, and potentially later, if it is even relevant to do anything with it later, if there's still anything to be addressed once we've already been going a better feeling direction with our attention. But ultimately, that it's not that there are problems and there are solutions. There are just solutions and things that we haven't experienced as solutions yet. And even the idea solution isn't really the right word, because solution suggests there was a problem. It's really that, to go beyond, take it another level, because rather than ego and internal guidance, rather than problem and solution, it's actually that there's just a whole bunch of clarifying experiences. And that's all it is. Everything is a clarifying experience. Everything is helping us figure out, what do we really want to be experiencing? What have we been making ourselves experience? What would we like to be making ourselves experience? Everything is helping us do that. So everything is aiding us on the journey, showing us what has been, and helping us, giving us the opportunity to clarify what we would like to be, and what we would like to experience, what we'd like to feel. And if we look at everything that way, then rather than zero in on the problem like a wall in front of us, then we would see it as, another opportunity to figure out where I'm going instead, because clearly I'm putting a hurdle in my path in the way that I've been treating myself. And I'd like to go around this hurdle. What would be around? What would be the other side of it? What would that be like? And so then we could reframe the entire way we experience it. Because again, connecting all this thought of like two voices versus problem and solution, that there aren't two voices, there's only the solution, there's only the inner guidance, there's only the internal partner, there's only the good. Everything is good, and then us not perceiving it as good. And it is not that it is not good, it is just that we haven't yet actualized it as good in our perception of it, in our experience of it, because we haven't yet learned from it what could be better and steered that direction. And it's like those kids in the movie that ultimately, we just haven't treated them as better yet. They didn't have the opportunity to show themselves to us as better because we didn't treat them as better, and they kept giving us what we expected. They kept reacting to us based on the way what we gave toward them, the way we treated them. And so if we could start treating things not as problems but as clarifying experiences, imagine how amazingly different our lives could be, that there were never any problems. There's only clarifying experiences. There are only, opportunities to experience better in our lives. And hey, look at that, another opportunity. I know that like on the other side of this is like vastly better. I'm so glad this is arising right now. Like this thing that I in the past would have reacted to and been like, I must fix this is terrible, that now it's like, yes, another clarifying experience. That means that I have a much better experience in my life soon to be actualized, because I have this thing here showing me what I could change and helping me figure out what do I prefer instead, and how could I get that, and what would that be like. And I would never have even conceived of that if it hadn't been for this thing that I saw here, that I've called a problem, but that I now see as an opportunity, and that's ideally how we would look at things. Again, then everything is good, and we could treat it that way, and we could actualize it as being that.
Yes, it's how can I say this? It's helping us shift from focusing on what we don't want to what we want, and then it becomes just a natural way of feeling, okay, this is what I want, this is what makes me feel good, and it becomes easier and easier to simply listen to that and to make decisions according to that. And then it always leads to a better experience, and we don't have to know in advance what it's going to be. It's just being able to pay more attention to this desire that we hold, and then give it the means to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, notice that desire becomes more obvious to us because of what we perceived as a problem arising, that we realize we have a desire for something, that without that problem we would not have necessarily acknowledged or recognized or fueled, that we do have some desire for some other experience, and we just haven't, and we haven't recognized that. But then this situation arose, and it's like, I have a desire for something. And it's like, well, good. Now we can do something with that. We could celebrate all our perceived problems that are all these opportunities for recognizing our desires. Yeah. This was a cool direction to this. I really like the way this came together, because there were a lot of different separate thoughts that came together in this conversation really nicely. And I really appreciate the way they came together. The idea of the two voices in us, the problem versus solution mentality, the duality mentality, versus that it's really just us and our internal guidance. The idea of, what is it that we're really going for, redirecting our attention, the kind of internal dialogue that would be most relevant and helpful, like how, what self-love even means, and how we want to apply that. And all these concepts came together really nicely, where, we want self-love would be love of everything. And then when is there something to be fixed? Like, we ought to be loving it. No problems. Like, it's just, how would we see this as something to love? Well, because it helped us recognize a desire that we really want something. And now we know what we want. Now we can go for it. Fantastic. Now we have something to love that we otherwise would have been disliking, that we perceived as a problem. So like, it's interesting how all this stuff came together in this unifying way in so many ways. This was cool.
Yes, really nice. And it shows that we can, like, we have it all within us, and that's really, really true. It's not just something that we read, and that's nice to experience, and also to have this perspective. Now I know what I want, and I have this nice direction that I can follow and enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put.
Well, thanks a lot. Amazing conversation.
Great, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.